Hello, welcome to the Housing Sector Podcast. We have Suz Muna from SHAC, which is always a pleasure to speak to you. Suz, thank you again for coming on. And today we are talking about something I've known very little about, a National Tenants and Residents Union and why we might need one. Can we start off? What would a National Tenants and Residents Union look like? What would be the purpose behind it?
Okay, well, I think for people, just to say, I'm always very, very happy to join you here. I love these episodes, so I love the podcast. So it's always really good to be invited on, really, and
It's
share
always
what we're
lovely
doing
to
at
have you
SHAC.
on. Lovely to have you
Thank
on,
you.
and we're the SHAC support is brilliant. I think SHAC is really out there, really providing support for tenants. So you keep up your great work.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So the idea with a National Tenants and Residents Union, it will be a concept probably a lot more familiar to people who've been in a trade union for their wherever they work, and it would offer a range of different services really, or support to those members for what we would hope would be a fairly nominal fee, but we do recognise that it probably will have to charge, which we don't, and obviously a lot of housing campaign groups don't. But crucially, one of the things they would offer would be the individual casework and support, which is a service that none of the campaign groups can really provide. They might help individuals, where they can, but it's not really a consistent service that any of us can provide because we just don't have staff or resources or a legal department. So that would be one of the things. But the other thing is that they would also help to organise on estates. So that would be like organising in a trade union in your workplace. They would help you to build up a membership, to get people campaigning on the issues that matter to the people on those estates, train people up on how to do, for example, negotiations with their landlords, because a lot of people don't even know where to start when it comes to something like that. So it would do that, but also on top of that, it would also have access to the politicians, which we know the landlords have got in spades. I mean, just on the social housing side, we know that 5 new MPs in July 2024 stepped straight out of jobs as housing association executives. So 4 of them went to Labour and 1 of them was a Liberal Democrat MPs. And obviously that gives them huge access to the decision makers in Parliament. And we just have no voice there. How many of our parliamentarians, if any at all, are living in social housing? I mean, or really had very close connection with it. So we don't have the kind of access to the political ear that the landlords will have. And we know, for example, Pennycook recently met with the National Housing Federation. He's always refused to meet with us because he's too busy, apparently. But he met with the landlords. He met with the National Housing Federation that represents the landlords covering, I think, about 90% of the social housing in Britain. So it would have the ability to build and develop and get the expertise in for much, much more powerful, lobbying on behalf of tenants and residents to the decision makers who are making the decisions about deregulating and what the regulators' powers should be and where rents should be set at and all the other things that kind of affect our members. And then finally, and again, I think this is really important, we know that the landlords can also do a lot to influence the press narrative and the impression about things that is given in the press. Although we do have very friendly press as well. I don't want to make out that none of them listen to us, because there has been some really good coverage of housing issues. But that kind of relationship and that kind of reach that a big trade union would have is way beyond anything that any of the individual housing groups, campaign groups have. So it would really do quite a wide range of things, but it would have all of that expertise in one place, really.
So if it was a lone tenant and I wanted to discuss damp and mold and I was a member, it would give me that sort of, okay, guidance, email here, send there, the sort of support, as you say, you and myself have offered to
Yeah,
people on an individual basis. And then if I needed legal expertise or if I
yeah,
needed to go to the regulatory social housing, things that aren't clearly signposted out, and I don't care what anyone says, they're
yeah,
not clearly signposted out as to where you go.
yeah,
Would that be the sort of support that I could get, that sort of guidance, that sort of hand
yeah.
holding?
Yeah, and the way that the trade unions do it, and I've already spoken to one of the law firms that works in the trade union sphere, and they said yes, they would be interested, but obviously they would need paying for it. But the way that the trade unions can afford it is actually very, very few cases that potentially could go to an employment tribunal ever do end up there. They
Mm,
get resolved beforehand, they get resolved through the formal or informal processes, or because one party decides to settle outside of court, all of that stuff. So what they can do is they can say everybody, if you imagine your membership fee to a trade union, a certain amount just goes as a retainer, if you like, to the lawyers. But because they have so many people, they are able to do that and then offer the legal advice and representation, which is very important if you were having to go into court to have legal representation, which we know the vast majority of tenants and residents cannot afford to
yeah,
do. They cannot afford to pay that out of their own pocket. Can be even for a single service charge dispute, we have seen quotes of around £40,000. I mean, it's huge.
mm,
But if you're only doing that for one in every 1,000 people who is, in your membership, then you can afford to do it. So we would give that representation to people, and it stays free. The idea is that it stays free because that's part of your membership fee. But I think another reason why, and this is a kind of side effect that we would want to come out of this, why the number of cases to a property tribunal would drop, or even to other organisations like the ombudsman, the regulator, and other authorities, if you like, is because when an employer sees a case won at an employment tribunal, at the EAT, so the higher level, can become an authority, it becomes a landmark case, and it sets a bar, and all of the others kind of know that now they will have to abide by that, or all of these other cases are going to come forward. So a single case can actually affect the way that all of the other employers behave, but we don't have the equivalent in the housing sector. So because landlords know that most people cannot get representation, that even if someone wins a landmark case that sets this really important precedent, they know that they can carry on as before because most people can't afford to do anything about it. So they don't really have to take notice. And I mean, it's one of the things I've seen that, we will have members coming to us and they'll say, oh, I've got this cast iron case. It's going to blow the whole thing wide open. It's really going to make a difference. And they genuinely believe that. And they go to court and they maybe win their case. But then they look around and it's still happening. Sometimes it's still happening to them, even,
yeah.
because the landlords just ignore what the courts order because they know that there's very little ability for anyone to enforce that. So that would start to change. They suddenly know that actually the tenants and residents have also got big guns on their side. It's not as one sided as it always was. So it would really start to change the landscape, I think.
Having myself having grown up in the 80s, unions always got this sort of bad reputation, and the likes of Arthur Scargill. Where has this come from, and are unions, are they a good thing or a bad thing?
Unions are a good thing. I'm a trade unionist. I've been for at least 20 years. So
Yeah.
you're not going to expect any different answer for me. I mean, why did that come about? For the same reasons that we've seen landlords starting to push back against tenant and resident groups now and starting to feed a kind of quite toxic story to the press about, what we're doing. And you've seen this yourself, Ben, in the work that was done against you, is that when you start to kick the hornet's nest, when you start to threaten their interests, their financial interests, even, they are going to fight back. And it's the same with employers, but obviously they are fighting a bigger foe than they have they haven't really felt that threatened by tenant and resident groups yet. So they might not like us, but they don't necessarily feel that threatened, apart from occasionally, as happened with you. So, there's something that makes an impact on them and they start to respond. So it's because it's threatening the business side, the economics of these massive commercial employers, commercial entities, these employers. And so they will do that. They will feed the bad stories into the press. They will give it a bad image. And we would have to expect some of that. They will try and talk down what we're doing. They will try and sully our name. They will try all those dirty tactics. But the point is, when it comes to it, the tenants and residents will have a big power on their side. At the moment, all of the things that go into giving the landlords power, so the access to politicians, their financial resources, their access to the press as well, the fact that they've got entire press departments, never mind part of somebody's voluntary work, but an entire press department. All of those things give the landlords enormous power, don't they? And they play golf with the right people and all of that stuff. But there's nothing that is a kind of equal and opposite power that's on the tenants and residents side. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to change. It did make me think, actually, though, as well as, having a bad reputation, one of the reasons was that obviously, and still is, that trade unions will support workers to withdraw their labour to go on strike. If they cannot, through any other means, as a last resort, they will be able to say, well, we withdraw our labour. And that is part of what, the employers have kind of latched onto, and some of the press as well, some of the right-wing press have latched onto and given them, a kicking about. Well, this would be something else that a tenants and residents union would be able to do, where we see these, for example, skyrocketing rents, skyrocketing service charges. If people wanted to withhold payment, that would be something that it could support them to do, the way that SHAC has supported people to do it. But we are doing it still on a very small scale, because obviously our membership numbers are nothing like you would get in a massive kind of, Unite the Union has 1.4 million members or something. We're talking about a really different scale to anything that any of us can operate on at the moment. So you can see how it would be possible to really, if there was a big big cause that needed everyone to unite behind it, it would be possible to do that.
Because one of the things that we have going against this is we're all in little groups of our own, aren't we? We've got the end cladding scandal, we've got leaseholders, we've got yiddly yaddle. And I always think, well, if we all came together, because we're all fighting the same enemy, and we shouldn't be fighting and we shouldn't be referring to them as enemy, but that's the way it feels when we get into this combative position. How can we all bring us? Can we all be part of this new union?
Yeah, ultimately, I would want SHAC to be able to shut down, because there was some alternative that we wouldn't be needed anymore. That would be my dream, is for SHAC not to be needed. And I'm sure that the activists in every other campaign group, and even maybe housing sector podcast might not be needed in the future. That's what we all want, isn't it? We don't want for people to be experiencing the kind of problems. But certainly, even if it doesn't get to that point, certainly something that can kind of host big events, bring all of the different campaign groups together. They don't have to shut down. They could carry on doing what they're doing, but still work in partnership with this, with this union. If we do get it formed with this union, that would be something it would be possible for them to do. And again, very similar to the way that any social movement, has lots of different groups in it, but they will find a way to kind of coordinate and liaise what they're doing. And we've seen that with all the big major kind of social struggles in the past, whether it was over kind of, race equality or disability or any of these big issues that we've seen in the past. That's what happens. You'll have lots of little groups, but then they will work together and they will form a movement rather than just us all working away, beavering away, as you say, in our little groups. So yeah, that would ultimately be the aim, and it would be inclusive. Our next step is really to start looking for a date in the autumn where when we can try and bring the trade unions together um, with other groups who are interested, with activists, kind of, or anybody who's interested, and just have some kind of conference in the autumn, and kind of work out how is the best way to get it off the ground. And we want everybody's voice in there. We want people even who are, I don't know, living in boats on the river or in caravans. We've got a big community living in caravans now in Bristol because they just can't rent anywhere. People just can't afford to rent. So it's really looking at everyone who needs a voice when it comes to their housing situation, and we would want everyone to be included.
Now, if I was a housing association, which obviously I'm not, but I would be going, well, hang on, a union's going to be a great thing because we want to be great. We want to be providing a great service. And we've got this rhetoric in which we say that we are, and we're doing this, and we're going to do this. So if we had a union that was helping to raise the voice of our tenants and maybe could help us pick up on the bits we've missed or the balls that we've dropped, this would be a great thing. Is that the sort of expectations you have from the housing associations?
Yes, I fully expect my phone to be ringing off the hook. As soon as they hear that this is going to be happening. No, I'm not expecting that. I mean, actually, there might be amongst the smaller cohort or the cohort of smaller housing associations and smaller providers, co-ops, for example. Some co-ops are really well organized. There are co-op federations. So for those who have been able to hang on to a social purpose, then I don't think they will feel threatened by SHAC. I think they might think, yes, this is a good idea, and we'll work together on it. So that would be very welcome. I think the ones that we are kind of having to organize, the reason we're having to organize, these are the big, very highly commercialized ones that are causing a lot of problems, really. So co-ops, for example, they are landlords in that sense, but everybody owns their own home, and really they try and keep the cost down and things like that. So they are a model of housing that might look to a union for some kind of support at some point, but wouldn't feel threatened by it.
Sounds like a close stage. So what do we have to do as residents? How can we help support this? Because maybe I should go back. What sort of stage are we in? How far are we from having a union? There's
Well,
several
at the moment,
questions
this
there.
is just a vision on paper at the moment. So,
Right.
like I say, our next step is really to organise some kind of conference, and that conference will put together a steering group of people who are prepared to get actively involved, want to take on a bit of a role. Not something that's going to take over their lives, but just take on a few tasks, and we can share the load a bit. The biggest thing that people can do to help at the moment is that what we need to persuade the trade union movement that that this is needed, because they are very focused on, because we're expecting the trade union movement to help fund it and get it off the ground, and they are very focused on within the workplace. So what we need to do is really show that this is necessary, and it is causing problems in the workplace. And the way that we're doing that is we've got a survey that's open at the moment. So if people can do this survey, it's completely anonymous. It asks about their rent or their housing cost rises compared to their wage rises, if they've had a wage rise. And it asks about other ways that bad housing is causing a problem in the workplace. And an example of that might be that somebody, for example, has to take a long time off work because they're suffering with asthma. In the workplace, it'll get recorded as an absence due to asthma. It won't say that person is living in a home covered in black mold, covered in mushrooms,
Yeah.
and that's what's triggered their asthma. So the bad housing part of it might be quite hidden, and we need to reveal that. So anybody who is in work, please fill out our survey, and obviously I'll give you the details so you can pop that on there as well, because that would be a really great thing. So
Right.
that's one way that people can really help to build it.
There's a QR code here now, which you can scan with your mobile phones. That will drive you directly to it. In the description, there will be a link to that as well, so you can all fill that in. And so yeah, I've done that one, that survey. That's a good one. That's going round. Is the engagement from residents? Are people saying yes, this is a good thing? This is really going to help me,
Yeah,
or is there
yeah.
uncertainty?
No, I mean some of the other housing organizations, other kind of community groups are kind of like I think kind of thinking, well, are we just going to announce the creation of this and it's trying to kind of knock them out of their space? And that's absolutely not, and I can understand why they have those kind of concerns. That's absolutely not what we're about. It's about working with everybody in whatever way kind of works out best, really. But the doors will be open for them to input. And for example, we spoke to Cladag have supported it, but also Inclusion London, and Inclusion London, want to be able to come in and really help us make sure that we are a very inclusive organisation right from the get-go, not as an add-on kind of 3 months down the line or something. It's right from the get-go and things like that. So it's really again just benefiting from as much expertise and experience that there is out there. We are asking, so the other thing people can do, if you are in a tenants and residents association, it doesn't have to be one that is recognised by any landlord, but as long as you have formed a TRA and the TRA has a name, you can put your name as supporting it. And again, we'll kind of give links for all of that so that people can just add their name. And so far, we've got about, I think it's coming up to about 50 TRAs that are kind of, have given their support, and about 10 kind of housing campaign groups, if you like, that have given theirs. So anyone who wants, and support just means that they think that it's a good idea. It's not anything more than that. They're not having to endorse the end product really. But I think the key thing will be this kind of next stage of involvement, which is the involvement with the trade unions. And it's a bit like, again, for people who sort of know trade union history, it's a bit like the way that the trade unions got together and formed the Labour Party, but the Labour Party is a separate entity to the trade unions. But in Britain in the 1900s, the early 1900s, the Labour Party was formed by trade unions saying we need a political voice. How do we do that? Well, we will have to start our own political party. And that's what they did. I'm not making any comment about where it ended up, but that's where they started. So it's the same idea. The trade unions would gather around, would help fund it, would help advertise it, so that everyone in that union knows that of this, the tenants and residents union's existence, to really help get it started and get it off the ground, I think.
I'm sure that will mean Angela Rayner will be the first one to help get this across the line.
I'm sure she'll be knocking at my door, Ben.
Yeah, yeah, she knocks at mine frequently. That's the way, Angela. What else is going on in the world of SHAC at the moment?
Well, at the moment, we are about to send out a press release about just the growing number of people who are now withholding payment. And actually, it's all so far. It's been service charges, usually a portion of people's service charges, either because they've gone up, by a huge jump, or because they are unhappy. For example, the cleaning hasn't been done, or repairs haven't been done, or ASB isn't being dealt with. But today I had a meeting with a group that are thinking about it in terms of their rent as well. They've got an issue, a dispute over their rent levels and the rent rises that the landlord is making. So they're going to kind of withhold that, and they wanted more information about how to do it as safely as possible. So we are seeing tenants and residents kind of increasingly saying we're not willing to kind of play by, to play their game. We're going to take control. So that's quite positive. We're waiting to hear from the National Audit Office about whether it's going to investigate service charges, and we'll let everybody know as soon as we get an answer from them, really. So yeah, there's lots going on. Plenty to keep us busy as always.
It is, and the WhatsApp group's very active. I keep
Yeah,
a glancing view on that one, and it's great to see more and more people added to it on an almost sort of weekly
yeah,
basis. So it means
yeah,
you're sort of making progress, which is great. And tenants need that
yeah,
voice, as we've all found out. We need that voice and we need that support. And if we can all come together, that would be marvelous.
yeah,
I can do a
yeah.
podcast talking about Elvis Presley movies and Johnny Cash songs.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We can spend our time on something else, really. So yeah, I'm sure everyone would want.
Yeah. All right, Suz, it's been lovely catching up with you again. When we've got that conference date sorted out, let me know. We'll come back on and we'll do, and anything that the housing sector can do to support, obviously, we're in there.
Yeah. You're on as one of our supporters, so that's brilliant. Yeah,
No,
lovely.
no.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Ben. Take care.
Take
Enjoy.
care.
Thank
Have a good
you.
day. Cheerio. Bye bye.
You too.